Welcome, one and all, to the now still weekly Mid-Curve podcast. We have such a fun time trying to figure out the dates and times to do this. I am your, host, Fonky Donk / Gavin Purcell. I am a media person who fell into this space somewhat by accident, but have been deep in it for a couple of years now, and I'm excited to chat with my friends in the Mid-Curve Discord. Mid-Curve, if you're not sure, is a group of people that are, I think, pretty smart, also can be dumb at times, which is the best kind of people, who are all kind of traders and degens and a bunch of other things that have kind of come together. We do this podcast once a week to kind of talk about the market and all sorts of other stuff. I'm just going to go around the table here and get our quick intros before we jump in. Grant, do you want to give everybody the two-sentence bio?
Hey folks, my name is Grant. I come from the world of traditional consulting, fell into the space backwards 2 years ago. I stopped traveling for work 3 years ago, and the last place I traveled had, an average air quality score of, it's basically equivalent to you spending time in the peat mines. And as it turns out, North America on the East Coast is exactly that again this week, unfortunately.
Grant, are you in New York or in Toronto? Or do you want to, if you don't want to say, that's fine. We can edit it out.
That general area, yeah.
Okay. So it's all kind of looped in together right now. Yeah, it's pretty brutal. I am not there. I'm in LA, which is finally sunny, but I know actually I think a lot of our people on right now. Sadie, first of all, give us the two-sentence bio and then tell us how hard it is to breathe there.
Hey guys, I'm Sadie. I buy and sell financial services companies for a living, and I degen probably a greater proportion of my time than I should. And it is actually getting better in New York today, but yeah, yesterday was a bit apocalyptic for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty scary, some of the pictures. Eric, what about you? What's your quick two-sentence bio, and then give us your breathing index?
Hey guys, it's Eric, former TradFi weirdo, current Web3 weirdo. I mean, today was pretty good, but yesterday was definitely like hellscape-ish. Yeah, it was very like Mad Max Fury Road. But hopefully it's not like that going forward.
Yes, I think we can all hope that is one thing. I think as a unified nation, we can all hope for, outside of any sort of political or crypto feelings, we can all hope that we will be able to breathe as human beings. Although maybe in the future, maybe we won't need it. Maybe we'll move on to a hybrid universe where we don't have to breathe as people. But let's for right now talk about what's actually happening in the markets here. It's been kind of a choppy kind of week. Obviously, the big news coming in the crypto markets was the SEC kind of coming down on both Binance and Coinbase. A lot to talk about here. Eric, do you want to give us the TLDR on the basics of this?
Yeah, the TLDR is the SEC is suing Binance and Coinbase. The common refrain in both of those suits is they were acting as unregistered. They were selling unregistered securities. They did not register properly as broker dealers, both of which are violations under existing securities law. The more juicy stuff with regards to Binance is specifically that one they commingled user funds between Binance US and Binance.com, as well as basically going out of their way to ensure that US VIP clients could circumvent the geofencing of the .com service and still trade on Binance.com despite being within Binance US. On top of that, there's also allegations that these guys were not OFAC compliant and just doing all sorts of really, really questionable things in the background that are either just regulatory violations or just outright illegal. So a lot to dig through, a lot of pretty incriminating and not great looking chat logs that they were able to pull.
We're operating as an unregulated security, bro.
Yeah. So now we're gonna litigate. So I think Sadie can probably cover a lot more of the legalese than I can. So I'll let her take over from here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but have a little bit of experience with securities law in the course of what I do, and obviously we've had a lot of exposure in crypto, and I think the SEC feels like they have a pretty solid case, just based on some of the actions they've taken, including the nature of the court that they are sued in and the nature of the kind of emergency freeze on assets that they are pursuing against Binance, which indicates to me that they're pretty sure that the funds are being commingled. But look, hot take, I guess, but I think it's all super bullish for the industry, and I think we were going to have to rip the Band-Aid at some point, and it might as well be now.
Yeah. So when you say that super bullish, you mean that, and I assume this mean, but feel free to correct me, that the idea we needed to get into this at some point anyway, and this is the beginnings of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been this sense from crypto institutions that there needed to be new laws written for crypto, and in part that's because that if the old laws stood, that they had been in violation of them like forever. And so they were very committed to new laws existing. If in fact new laws aren't going to exist, then they have to fight them tooth and nail, but presumably they'll lose because they're in violation of them. And I think that kind of yields the floor to a new set of companies who are just going to operate in compliance with existing law. It's not impossible. Lots of people do it. And kind of create the incremental change that's needed in order to adapt existing practice and law and regulation and enforcement to crypto, which isn't as drastic as I think a lot of people have claimed who have an interest in saying that the existing regulation doesn't fit at all. And so, if, VC 1.0 and Coinbase and Binance are stuck in litigation forever, and there's a new kind of generation of crypto company, I think that could be super bullish.
Okay, that's interesting. So what I was going to ask is, and anybody's feel free to jump in on this, but my question is, as somebody who hasn't been following this very closely, is that obviously it seems like from afar that Coinbase has been attempting to try to get some sort of conversation like this on the books for a while. At least their PR is doing a good job of kind of pushing that out there. Do you feel that Coinbase, according to these old laws, if they're not going to change them, are in serious violation of what those old laws say still, even not say outside of the Binance kind of like shifty stuff that we've been hearing about? Coinbase, which seem to have been trying to operate in somewhat of a more reasonable way, are they still going to be in trouble?
So the question you're asking comes down to whether you believe that the tokens they sell are securities.
Right.
If you do, they're unequivocally in violation of securities law. And if not, then I think they would argue they aren't. The reality, though, is that the most bullish thing possible for crypto would be to stop fighting about it.
Right. To just get an answer. Is that what you're saying? Like just have an answer one way or the other?
Well, and I think that's the fundamental PR win for Coinbase is there is an answer. We have it.
Right.
They just don't like it.
Right. That's interesting. I see. So you're saying that the answer is out there already, but they're trying to fight against what the answer is because they don't like it.
They have to fight it because the answer makes them completely vulnerable. But the reality is that the most bullish thing in the world would be for these to be securities and to resolve that regulatory uncertainty.
I mean, it just seems to be a lot of back and forth about, whether it meets the threshold of a security under the Howey test. But I kind of just abstract that one step further and just say, why the fuck would anybody hold Cardano without the expectation of profit? Or Solana or Matic, I just given how much we sort of talked about how mercenary the participants are within this space and everything is ultimately profit seeking, no one is coming into one of these tokens and saying, well, I like the utility. No, we're all holding it to make fucking money, right? Because there's actually very little utility in the underlying tokens. So they serve as effectively a speculative instrument for us to extract value, often from each other. That sort of is just the nature of this, right? And so I kind of agree with Sadie. I think just call them fucking securities and then provide guidance around registration and reporting requirements and get it over with. Because from a retail onboarding perspective, like it's actually very, very easy for retail to participate in securities now. We have so many onboarding funnels. Like you can do Robinhood, you want to do T Ameritrade or Interactive Brokers, like what have you. Like there's very little difference in my eyes from a bunch of degenerates like gambling over, magic internet money versus a bunch of degenerates gambling over ridiculously priced, their calls on GameStop. So just make it a fucking security and get on with it and just make it clear and easy, so that institutional players can do what they need to do to build out the infrastructure, and companies have a pretty clear financial incentive to participate, which is this is the greatest open air casino in the world. And now like the fear of regulatory backlash is gone.
Right. Okay, that all makes sense to me. The question I would have, if that comes to pass, so Sadie, you mentioned there would be some new people that come in. Do you feel that is that like established financial people that are going to come in and then be the crypto brokers from this point on? Or do you see that as other startups that just got started later and waited for this to happen?
So the interesting thing about securities law in the United States is it's incredibly well established. It's the biggest market in the world. And there are all sorts of levers for built-in demand that spring up the minute a new security comes along, or a new type of security. And so the cool thing is any existing player that participates in the securities market could then participate in crypto. You don't need a new thing. Fidelity, right? The S&P 300 crypto, right? A vast amount of demand. And any index, any ETF, right? Any mutual fund, any single one would create a level of demand that we haven't seen in crypto in several years now. And so the sheer scale of the built-in demand, once you eliminate the regulatory overhang and you create something that fundamentally already exists, for which there's already a framework, I think you just create a massive structural wave.
That's interesting. Okay, well, I feel like I now have a slightly better understanding. Grant, do you have a thought on this at all? One way or the other?
No, I kind of would just like to abstain because I'm not not knowledgeable on the subject, and I just don't greatly dislike the messenger of this whole thing. But yeah, I mean, generally, none of us are getting any younger, so let's get on with it.
That makes sense. Sadie, before we move on from this, I'm curious to have one more thought from you, which is, I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, and yet when you hear the like conventional wisdom in the crypto space, it's always like, fuck regulation. That's all bullshit. Like, where do you think that comes from? Is it coming just from like decentralized maxis? Is it coming from people who just want to continue in the world that we did? Or like, where is that idea coming from that like they're pushing back, that the general kind of crypto world is pushing back on regulation?
I think you'll probably get into my bias against venture capitalists in this answer, but to me, it comes from fake it till you make it, and it turns out that that's not how it works.
Interesting. I think that's really fascinating. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think that's the fundamental answer, which is there are some really thoughtful, nuanced players in this market that are not as loud in that respect. What you have in the market in terms of the loudest voices on this issue are large venture capital backed companies that basically need to win in order to be successful, in order to create the level of return that their sponsors are looking for.
Right. And who have put in a shitload of money into it already, right? Over the last 2 to 5 years.
100%, staked reputations on it, et cetera. And so to me, what that is confirmation bias. It's basically saying, well, we didn't pursue the route that ultimately, came to pass. We created a bunch of risk factors in our, S1 filing to go public that ultimately came true. And we knew those were risks and we ignored them. And now we want to justify that. So we're saying that we couldn't ever have done that in the first place, but that's just fundamentally untrue.
Interesting.
it kind of comes back to this idea that if you just make crypto register, a security and your securities registration, then a crypto specific, storefront really has no moat or has no competitive advantage. Because as Sadie alluded to, existing institutional players that have the infrastructure will just fold it in. And so where does that put a business like Coinbase? Where does that put a lot of these like crypto specific custodians, right? It's a weird question. It leaves them in kind of this really weird spot. And so, like if you just build like this specific product that's supposed to exist, where the existing rules don't matter to you, then yeah, that's great. But if all of a sudden, this clarity on guidance and everybody, there's a lot of bigger players that have deeper pockets, better established systems and controls that are now your competition. And they also have an existing legacy business that's cash generative that can really fund them. Then all of a sudden, like, you as the VC backed player, even if you do have a large treasury, you're now small stack at the table. So that is like, it is a consideration. I think like from a purely mercenary profit driven standpoint, that is a real consideration. I also just think that, there is this like, if you look at the timeline, which I hate, like there is this general propensity for lawlessness. Or not lawlessness, but just libertarianism, just because of the roots of the movement itself.
Yeah.
Right. So you do have like, I think like maximalists who want decentralization, don't want the government in crypto, and who just believe that these are all pure bearer assets at the end of the day, and it's a completely free market. And then you just have you also have the other guys who like, they mostly made money by extracting value from their followers or other people, who might now be on the wrong end of an indictment or criminal prosecution if these are indeed securities. Obviously, their preference is to not have that happen, so they don't end up in an orange jumpsuit. But like, this is kind of one of those like weird frontier spaces, that I just think like as part of maturity and like mass adoption, you kind of just need it to happen, because you can't just have situations where like someone like a Ben goes send me money and people send him $7 million, and it is what happens. Like that's just, it's not really appealing to I feel like a regular person.
That's interesting, because it is kind of like why right now it almost feels like it's like the purge. Like it's the last moment of like craziness that could happen, and all this stuff is all going down at once. Okay, I have one last question on this, which is NFTs. In this world, Sadie and Eric, are NFTs considered securities themselves, or would just tokens attached to NFTs? But NFTs are non-fungible tokens. Would they also be considered securities?
Sadie, I'll let you take this one, because this is out of my realm of expertise.
So what I would say is that once there's a modicum of understanding about just the basics, then you start getting into the really interesting questions. And there are a lot of really interesting questions that TradFi is still figuring out as well, around how to interpret the 40 Act and where the SEC can provide, some kind of preemptive exemptive relief, and clarify, in a way that isn't creating new laws or clarifying via enforcement. And so that to me is really exciting, which is, once you have a baseline agreement across the industry and the regulator, then you can start asking some of these more nuanced questions in a more constructive way. And I think there's a lot of hope there, right, in terms of being able to get to an answer that, respects the nature of certain types of NFTs, especially ones that are art, and kind of winds us up in the right place. The only other thing I would say on this, and I honestly have a little bit enjoyed the schadenfreude of this, is I enjoy that the regulator, personal opinions aside, Grant, kind of called the industry's bluff. I mean, the reality is that the argument they were fundamentally making is like they wanted new laws because they wanted them. And that's not how it works. You don't get new laws just because you ask for them, that just apply to you. And so, no matter how much money you have back,
it's not like this, like the secret menu at the McDonald's where I can request for it.
right? I just don't like this one. Can I have a different one, please? Like that, and those of us that have been trying to, create products in the context of the regulations that exist for a long time, I think feel a level of relief that they didn't just get a new set because they asked for them.
Right. Okay. Well, this is the fascinating conversation. It keeps bringing other things up into my brain.
I have one last question for these guys. Funky, what's your take on, in terms of the long view? Like clearly this is, well, it was never always going to be the Wild West, but like whether or not most assets here are coined as commodities or securities, like what's better for the layman speculator here?
Honestly, probably a security. It is. I would say it's like it's actually for most retail much less burdensome to trade stocks and stuff than to trade commodities. Because that does because then you're getting usually into futures which have much stricter margin requirements. And generally requires a much larger, account balance to facilitate that kind of activity. So if you kind of just treat these things as like stocks, and all of a sudden like we're just all sort of trading like GameStop, then I feel like that's actually pretty good. That's kind of my take on the situation. NFTs are a little weird because they're technically, I think, like treated as real estate assets under existing tax law, and maybe that's where they stay. I think the really interesting question that I have to ask is like, what happens to NFT lending in that case? Because like,
Yeah.
What is that? Is that like a mortgage-backed security? Then like who's able to do it? Who's not able to do it? That's a more difficult question that I don't have an answer to.
Yeah, I would agree with Eric that for the average person, it's probably easier to own a security. I would say for folks who are invested in crypto today, I think, whatever cycles we've seen to date are going to be just infinitesimally small compared to structural adoption. Right. And so I don't know that I'm necessarily bullish forever. Markets get more efficient, inefficiencies are ironed out. And, that's where a lot of folks make money on crypto today. But for people who are invested in the industry now, I think if you're able to create regulatory clarity, if you're able to have real market players come in, that's the level of structural adoption is just going to be huge.
Yeah, I'm so interested about. I really am starting to project outwards, and this will probably transition to our next thing where I do a lot of projecting outwards. But like, it's interesting to think about like what new crypto projects would look like in that instance. Like, well, here's one last question in this space because I will play dumb because I really don't know a ton about it. To start, and I know this has been one of the arguments in some ways, but to start a project that would be considered a security, what else? Like is there a lot of hoops to jump through versus obviously now you can just go and you can create a token and do like people we've known and have seen do and just get a bunch of money sent to you. How much harder will it be to start stuff? Because I think that's probably one argument that the VC side makes a little bit, that you're going to be holding back innovation.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it will vary depending on the complexity of the thing you're starting, but practically what you have to do is create a public filing and write some legal docs. It's not tremendously burdensome. Again, the infrastructure for this exists. You'll need some clarity around what you have to disclose because it's a fundamentally different type of thing. But if what you're creating is a relatively simple protocol, then the filing is more simple as well.
Okay, that's fair. This is obviously a pretty complicated situation, but we'll keep monitoring it. All right, let's move on to this other thing I was just referencing, which is kind of outside of the crypto world, but is a pretty big thing that happened, and I think kind of feels okay. So this is a thing that I've been noticing, and I know this happens from time to time, but it feels like our news cycles have like ramped up in a major way. We have all this Gensler stuff in the crypto world and all the SEC stuff. We have what seems like aliens that nobody seems to be talking about at all, but like there's a lot of alien talk, which seems very fascinating. And then, we obviously the AI stuff we've talked about on this podcast a bunch before, but now we have Apple introducing its new Vision Pro, which, I think if most people were to just see that a couple years ago, they would 100% think it's a Black Mirror episode, watching where we are going as a species. I will very quickly give the basics on the Vision Pro. It is a pass-through headset. It is not a pair of glasses. It is ostensibly a pair of VR goggles that have really good full color pass-through that allow you to see the real world. It allows people to have what you would think of as metaverse experiences, but also combination mixed reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality kind of in one device. Apple has obviously spent billions of dollars on this thing. It is very expensive. It's not out yet. It's not going to come out till early next year. It's coming out at a $3,500 price tag, but people are interested in it. I'm interested in it. It seems like a cool thing. Why don't we hear from people and just hear kind of what their thoughts on this were? Grant, I know you might have some thoughts. What are your thoughts on the Apple announcement?
You can circle back to me.
Okay, fine. Okay, all right, Eric, you start. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it's this is like a product that if it were not an Apple product, I feel like would just be the butt of endless ridicule and completely flop commercially. But because it is Apple and because it is their product, I feel like there's actually quite a bit of anticipation around it. Especially given how well their previous new product launches have done over time, right? But I say it's kind of ridiculous because this is literally, it's a $3,500 headset that is the equivalent of you strapping two laptops to your face while leaving the thing plugged into a wall. Where you can like you can theoretically still interact with people in the real world and not be completely disconnected. But it just, when I kind of think of that basic premise of just like strapping two laptops to my face, and then plugging myself into a wall to interact with this augmented reality, but somehow being able to stay connected to the real world, I kind of just laugh a little bit. So it is, I just feel like this is sort of the first permutation of and I'll say like the first like ultra luxe, like cutting edge permutation of consumer AR VR. So it's it may be a case that it is just too early for its time. The tech is not there. It's a promising proof of concept. But what I really get excited about is like what this looks like maybe 2 to 3 product cycles down the road. Because that's I think where like the tech gets better, it gets really interesting. People have been building for a couple of product cycles, and it starts to get really, really good.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, listen, I was around there for the iPhone launch, and when the iPhone launched originally, it was pretty kind of not universally crapped on, but it was a lot of people didn't believe it was going to work, and I think a lot of people believe there was no way people were going to use a touchscreen on their phone when they were so used to Blackberries. And Steve Jobs obviously made a change, and it became the biggest company in the world. I think the one thing that's interesting here, Eric, I totally think you're right. We're probably like 2 or 3 generations from something that's kind of significant. I actually think there is a use case for this in the world that we talk about, and it is not going to happen right away, but I am a believer in the idea that if this becomes the thing that people use, and I will always couch this with the fact that in the mid 2000s, at one point, I was convinced that 3D printing was going to be everywhere and that we were going to have 3D printers in every house and it was going to print out everything we had. I think there's a use case that if people are going to be wearing these things and they're able to go out and about, not just in their homes, not just in their offices, but if they're able to go out and about, that there's a conceivable use case for digital goods, specifically conceivably NFTs, in a way that I actually believe would be significant, right? Like the wearable conversation might be real, it might work. Like I know you might have seen that EA did a deal with Nike to bringing NFTs into their world, and all these pretty big corporations. Nike's Swoosh obviously is something. I think there is a world where if AR becomes a thing at scale, then digital goods and NFTs might have some interesting play in that space. But I also agree. I think we're probably, I mean, we might even be as far as 3 to 5 years away from that being the case. And who knows what the world looks like then? We might have AGI, and that'll just be a completely different experience for everybody. But okay, Grant, I'm coming back to you. Give me your thoughts on this.
Just, probably a simpler take than the rest of y'all's, but it looks incredibly ugly and dystopic and probably cringe to wear, and I'll probably need laser eye surgery before actually being able to enjoy it. But I think, dating back to coming home from school in elementary and just, firing off emotes on MSN Messenger, right? Like, this is what we were always destined to do in a society dominated by the internet. Virtual reality is what you make of it, and your surroundings are basically what you're willing to suspend your own disbelief for, right? And I think in a roundabout way, it really kind of adds to my confirmation bias for why I, took a look at fucking YouTube videos of NBA plays on the Flow blockchain 3 years ago and said, yeah, this is where I want to spend a lot of my time moving forward. So overall, like 1,000-foot view, like this is great. And in many ways, this is actually a much more positive signal than fucking Zuckerberg's, we're going all in and changing our stock ticker and company name and all that, because this is, an actual product that Apple wants to monetize on and wants to shift focus on moving forward.
Yeah, I think so. Sadie, what about you? Have you thought on the Apple Vision Pro or the AR VR future that we're headed to?
You guys are all much better positioned to opine. I think the only thing I would say is that it's obviously a luxury product right now, but I do have to wonder whether in-person interaction will be the provenance of the wealthy in the future.
That's interesting.
And it sort of has me thinking about who this is actually for when we think about, crypto degens. There is a little bit of bifurcation by country and socioeconomically, and I think there is a profile of, crypto investor that will want this, may want this. But
Sounds like you don't.
I don't.
It sounds
I
like you
don't.
don't. Yeah, that's interesting.
And I don't think that it would, it's not going to help me do deals, right? Like it's not a work device. It's like a TV on your face. So I just have to wonder, like, who ultimately is the end user of these products, and like, what does that mean for the future?
Well, so that's interesting, right? Because up until this point, most of the VR headsets have largely been positioned as a gaming product, right? Like the Oculus definitely was one. HTC's headset, that was a gaming headset. Steam has its own gaming headset. And so these are like the positions, hey, like experience these gamified virtual experiences. I think the interesting thing about the Apple announcement was that they really did not lean much into the gaming, if at all. And a lot of the positioning was, hey, this is like an augmented reality productivity tool. So you can have, these VR meetings. And by the way, we're gonna come out with like Teams, Zooms, and WebEx integration. They like when the product launches. I thought that was really interesting because they kind of like, I think they try to like position this as like a workplace tool. And $3,500, I feel like it's a big spend, but if you can justify it as like a business expense, and like, is this the nexus for like real actual virtual conferences, or maybe like circumvention of some of the less relevant like business travel? That and I feel like that shift kind of already started with COVID, but like that could be an interesting permutation of this product, because they're very clearly not building a gaming headset. So it does beg the question, like, what the end game is.
Yeah, I my take on this is, in general, I think So my biggest take about this is that Apple is looking to control the next platform, and I think they see this as a platform so they can have that 30% tax again, which I think is where they kind of just see overall things going. I think we're going to enter a really interesting space where there's going to be people that grow up with these sort of devices and are just comfortable with it. I think already people that are, say, like, 15 and under are just crazy comfortable spending all their time phones and game consoles and everything anyway. And they will think of this as a new version of that in some form that's married to the real world. I think that there will be a divide. Sadie, I thought your point about the in person, being the provenance of the rich is pretty interesting as well too. I mean, that is very much the Ready Player One world, and I think we'll have to see. I mean, I think there's no doubt that Apple is betting big on this. The one thing that people have talked a lot about and coverage of this is that the watch was originally a flop, and then they finally found that fitness was the thing that made sense for it. And when fitness made sense for it, suddenly it became a hit, and it worked out okay. The iPhone, I think people are comparing this to the iPhone, but I also think the iPhone had multiple use cases right away in that you had your iPod and a phone that you were carrying with you. Some people will carry them with them all the time. And this combined those two devices into one in addition to an internet browser. And this feels like you're having to convince people about why and how to use it, which is a really, really hard thing to do. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on this before we move on?
My only other thought is it further cements the difference between people who are being watched and people who are watching. I think the idea that you wear this in the presence of other people is ridiculous. And so you basically create a permanent class of performers and a permanent class of audience. And it will be interesting to see how that, I think, exacerbates our kind of current social media reality and what that means for content.
You're saying basically it turns more people into passive viewers, and they're not going to necessarily get up and create things or do stuff?
Maybe. I do think it turns a lot of people into permanent viewers only.
Right. Interesting. I mean, there's an argument in some ways that that's kind of what TikTok is doing, right? Or other things like that are doing too, which is an interesting thing. But yeah, I thought that's actually a super interesting point, and I think it's a good thought about like where our culture's going at writ large. So, and when you combine that with how much content will be coming down the pipe with AI being able to spit stuff out in a significant way, you're definitely going to be entering into a significant content consumption ecosystem. I think that's one thing that a lot of sci-fi writers have talked about for a long time, which is when you have a lot of people that have more free time, which assuming that AI continues to like take away jobs in some way, and maybe there's a UBI in the future, that it does become a place where consumption of content in some form or another is a lot of people's life, which again is a somewhat of a dystopian kind of view of the world. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a little about the NFT market right now. Is anybody looking forward to anything? I think, Eric, how did you end up buying a Sproto Gremlin, by the way?
I mean, I just, I did it to make money. And then once I was able to make a little money trading it, I started finding like ones that I really liked, just because these things look ridiculous, but it kind of like, the one that I'm currently using, it's actually the expressions that I feel like are actually very good, very on point. Like mine looks like, the face you would make when you just find out that your healthcare plan won't cover like the copay on your hemorrhoid cream, right? Like it's one of these like really, they're just kind of like goofy in that way, and so I sort of get a kick out of them, and I feel like that's the whole thing with this. With Sprotogram plans, with like Harry Potter, Obama, Sonic Inu, like this shit coin, which is just this ridiculous premise that I feel like maybe it's because we're so bored that the space is just totally leaning into.
Well, I will say this is the thing that I was talking about this in an earlier podcast I was doing, is that like I kind of find that, and this goes straight in the face of what Sadie was saying about regulation, is that this is kind of the fun part of, always has been the fun part of NFTs for me, which is just when you find the weird thing that everybody can kind of like coalesce around and suddenly decide is something. It's like there's almost no feeling like that. It's really hard to describe because you're all collectively buying into this idea that this thing is weird and strange. And I mean, these are so dumb because they don't even have
There's no traits.
they have no traits. They're AI. It's clearly AI art. It's the kind of thing that if it had come out like in the AI meta, whatever, 2 months ago, somebody would have been like, I'm not gonna buy this because like there's no way to know about it. But it's very like compelling as a movement in some way, which sounds so stupid, but like it's the anti thing in a lot of ways compared to what else. Sadie or Grant, do either of you have Sproto Gremlins, or are you interested in them at all?
Yeah, I've one. I think it's a great meme. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah. Sadie, have you seen these? Are you interested in them at all?
So I missed the mint, but I've held Bitcoin for a long time. Not the real Bitcoin, the meme Bitcoin. And it's funny when you see these things that are just like a clear kind of insider dog whistle, and they're just like obvious that they're going to do well. It's always the surest I am of any like shitcoin or NFT. There are a couple of just things that hit the right note. And
was that one of those things, the dev smoking crack on Telegram?
Yeah, like as the user base gets larger, it's only going to be more and more fun to find those things. So
yeah,
it makes you feel like a part of something.
Yeah, that makes sense. What else? Is anybody else like? Is there a project at all or anything that's kind of sticking out in your heads right now? It feels like the Azuki thing is kind of looming over everything, which we talked a little bit about last week. I guess, I mean, it's like all the same kind of players. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of other things happening in NFTs right now. Does anybody disagree with that? Does anybody feel like there's something like significant on the horizon, or something that's worth like even discussing, like that feels like something big going on in the space?
No.
You sound so disappointed.
I mean, you got the Azuki event, you got Meme Land. Maybe like you kind of have something, slow cooking with the gods, but like beyond that, there's just no new narrative. I guess like ordinals are moving a little bit. There's always BRC, like everyone's leaning into the BRC20 game. But it just feels like this is like sideways OCD, the way that this space is kind of acting, and we don't necessarily enjoy it, but we need something to do. I don't know.
Max pain is usually just the outcome you don't want to occur, and I feel like for the last month to quarter now, like we've been waiting for the attention and ERC20 shitters and ordinals to die down, and it just hasn't been that way, right? It fluctuates obviously from week to week, but it just seems like, at least for now, they've taken like a semi-permanent portion of the mind share amongst like the active zombies left in the space. So something to consider.
And the mind share, as you're saying, the mind share is so much smaller than it used to be, right? And that's why, getting back to the stuff at the beginning, it's like if we don't get some sort of influx of new blood at some point, it's just going to be slowly, going down and down over time as people lose money to people like Ben. Well, I think that's kind of it for now. We have some interesting stuff kind of on the horizon. I think it is June, which I know a lot of people may think that June is going to be a good month and that July and August might be a little quieter. But like, it does seem like crypto at large is doing okay for now. I guess we will see what happens over the next 2 weeks. In terms of the TradFi stuff, Eric, is there any like kind of significant things on the horizon to be watching out for in terms of like, I saw a story the other day, and maybe you can kind of illuminate this, where like now people are kind of doubting the kind of recession narrative, that it might be going away again. Have you heard anything about that?
Like there might be no recession.
Yeah, that's basically what I read, a story that there's a conversation going on now that they're convinced that the recession isn't going to happen. But I feel like at this point, I have no idea even how to follow those stories anymore, because I've been seeing that exact story, it feels like, for a year and a half at this point.
Yeah, I mean, like it's like these arguments are like Groundhog Day. I feel like every other day there's one. I think like now the predominant narrative is like, oh, maybe like there is no recession, or recession is much shallower, but like, is that good for the equity markets? Is that bad for the equity markets? because rates will stay higher for longer, and then we'll post debt ceiling negotiations, like liquidity start to come out of the system, and that's generally speaking not great for stocks. I don't know, man. Like it just we got CPI. We're starting to price in. We're probably pricing in another rate increase for June. And last month people thought we were done, right? And so it's just this like, supposedly everything's good, but oil prices have been so anemic that the Saudis decided that they need to cut another 1 million barrels. It's just a lot of random stuff happening. I'm not gonna like pretend that I can predict it, because smarter guys like Druckenmiller have gotten a lot of things right, and year to date, they're like it's not necessarily showing up in their numbers. So this is a pretty challenging environment overall if you're a public markets or macro investor to operate in. So like the only thing I would say is like probably like stay on your toes, take profit, and like just don't end up being like a true believer narrative, because you don't want to like wake up 3 years later just having like fucking stacked silver nonstop for 3 years and just have it go do nothing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's a good way to end, is don't be a true believer. We'll take that and go.
Just don't join these like narrative death cults, doomsday cults, where like you're making money is depending on the total collapse of society. And just like go outside, do something fun. Like fuck.
Yeah, I agree with that, Eric. And I would say also, like, if your success has, in the last, 10 years been predicated on free money driven by financial crisis or other crisis, you get addicted to the free money, but you also get addicted to the crisis.
Oh,
right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
And so how much of this is real prediction and how much of it is wishful thinking?
Right.
And how much of it is circular, right? Do you become the news when you're Druckenmiller or Mark Andreessen or Peter Thiel? And how much of that is predicting versus creating a bank run or a financial crisis? And
right.
And how do you, in the face of benefiting from the free money that catastrophe created, would you not want it? And so, like, don't become a true believer, but also would suggest people look to the demand side, which is whatever recession that exists is a very narrow recession, right? The American consumer is incredibly strong. Employment is strong. And so, all the more reason to take the news with a grain of salt, and certainly to take predictors with a grain of salt.
Okay, great. Well, let's wrap up here. Thanks everybody for joining us again. It's been a fun episode. Very heady episode, which is good, I think, every once in a while for us to kind of pull ourselves into the clouds of traditional finance and kind of talking a little bit about things that are going on. Thanks everybody. Thanks Sadie, Eric, and Grant for joining us, and thanks everybody out there for listening. Stick around for subscribe to this podcast. Make sure if somebody sent it to you, you should give them a big thank you, because they've really opened your eyes to an incredible audio experience that you're going to continue to get for some time to come. So make sure you give that person a nice present, and we will see you all next week.